Buenos dias and saludo. Hafide, good morning. This roundtable is conducted by the Subcommittee on Charter and Independent Schools, Public Libraries, and Technology Centers. It's hereby convened for the purposes and in compliance with the Open Government Law. Initial notification was provided to the community and disseminated on March 14th, and then subsequent notification to the public was also disseminated on March 19th. Before going through the agenda, I want to go ahead and take a moment to acknowledge we have the speaker with us, Speaker B.J. Cruz. Thank you for joining us, Speaker. We also have former Senator Doris Flores Brooks, the public auditor, so thank you. Thank you for joining us as well. I want to go ahead and just let everybody know that this roundtable is designed to facilitate open and frank discussion so that we have the equal opportunity to learn more about the charter school community. This is, for all intents and purposes, our inaugural subcommittee meeting. And I want to thank Senator Joe San Agustin, who will join us shortly, for impaneling this subcommittee. I want to go ahead and limit the roundtable to about an hour and a half. Some of you have expressed conflicting schedules, and so we'll try to keep it to that. The agenda for an hour, and then a lot of concerns and opportunities for contributions on how to improve for the last 30 minutes. I also want to encourage the charter school community that I interpret my role as being less of an oversight chair and more sitting on your side to encourage you and to work critically on issues where we may fall short, either on the policy side of the house or in just trying to drum up momentum to help move your school along and become even more successful. With that, I want to go ahead and acknowledge we have the Superintendent of the Department of Education. Thank you for coming, John Fernandez. We have the Vice Chair of the Board of Education, someone who I served before when I was with DOE, Ms. Maria Gutierrez, so thank you so much. I hope that there's enough material for you that had been passed around. If not, I'll verbalize for the record and the listening audience the agenda. Basically, we're going to cover a broad overview of charter schools, allow for an opportunity to address some of the issues facing charter schools, and if opportunity permits and we are able to retain some of the senior members from the Department of Education, as well as the Charter School Council Chair and her friends, representative of the Governor's Office, Mr. Vince. Thanks for joining us, Vince Leonguero. We can have an open discussion on what we believe to be the overall strategic direction for education on Guam, and then we'll open it up for anybody else. For those who may have to leave, I'll go ahead and put the announcements up front, okay? So in your packet, I'd like for everyone's awareness to know that the subcommittee and the Committee on Education as well will be conducting additional site visits. We had the privilege of visiting iLearn Academy twice, and we're looking forward to visiting Guahan and also with members of the two other charter organizations that were approved recently. Then there will be a mid-April subcommittee meeting, a little more focused, and I think it would be appropriate to address some of the critical concerns relative to the authorization process. I'll get into that as we talk very broadly about what schools are doing throughout the nation in terms of authorization and how that translates to a high-performing charter school. I also want to give us all the opportunity to be as open, transparent, and to provide ample time to talk about how we can improve the governance structure. I know that when the charter law was passed, a few of us are looking back now and seeing opportunities where we can kind of strengthen that, and we can talk about that. Then I'm hoping, I may not reach this milestone, but it's my hope with the support of the legislature and you folks in the charter school community that we can have a charter and independent homeschool conference so that we can begin to share some of that information and add to the body of knowledge. Charter schools in the Pacific are a relatively new phenomenon. Just in the United States alone, they've only been around for the last 8 to 10 years as well in any major fashion. With that said, if anyone wants to jump in after I just talk on a couple key points which are included in your packets about the national scope of charter schools. Since 2009, the amount of charter schools throughout the United States has tripled. We now see there's approximately 7,000 charter schools enrolling about 3 million students, or 6% of the student enrollment nationally. 44 states and territories have public law or public policy relative to governing charter schools. And so there's a good amount of information out there that we can glean over and learn from or add to. Of course, I'm not including the entire literature review, but we can see for the most part that the nature of charter schools has allowed for improved student learning outcomes. Interestingly enough, and this is yet to be debated here on Guahan, but we also see nationally at least, and I provided the source, an opportunity for students with special needs to improve as well. I don't know what the particulars are about that statistic, but I'm sure we can pick that conversation up at another time. But like anything else, there are challenges associated with charter schools. We see them here locally as well, particularly in the areas of funding. Charter schools overall have a really interesting mix of funding sources in the United States, but they have the same challenges we have here in terms of funding infrastructure and facilities. We see that as a direct result of that, there are facilities that are yet to be desired or would be more desirable in terms of gymnasiums and libraries or even science labs for some of the charter schools nationally, but I would suspect it applies here as well. On the next slide here, I'm also happy to share some of the more operational successes of charter schools, and maybe this is a sticking point. If there's anything, what little I know about charter schools, I know that they have the ability to be flexible and to implement and innovate, at least in terms of the curriculum. We know irrefutably that they rely heavily upon human capital, so their instructors within the charter schools, I would assume, are driven in large part by things other than money, and I think a future report may substantiate that across the board, charter school teachers earn significantly less than even public school teachers, not just here, but throughout the nation. And so that's a good conversation point to pick up later. Charter schools tend to do well in what they consider to be low-performing districts throughout the United States. I would have to assume, given our standardized test results, that we may even qualify Vince or the superintendent or the former chair. Rosie Tanatongo is with us. You're more than welcome to come up here, ma'am. And maybe the vice chair of the Board of Education could also speak to that issue in the future. But what we're also seeing as an opportunity, or maybe a contributing factor to charter school successes, is their alternative governance structure. For example, one of the charter schools, and I may be speaking out of turn here, but one of the charter schools doesn't have a formal PTA, but instead they involve the PTA not in the periodic activities of the school, but almost in the regular activities of the school, and fully immerse them in the classroom and the learning and the physical environment of the child's total experience. So that's something even I have never seen, both here or in the Northern Mariana Islands, or at the public school, or in the private schools that I had the privilege of working at. And so, those are some of the statistics that we can associate with charter schools nationwide. Maybe I can open this up too. Please, just feel free to jump in. We know that public charter schools were established by Public Law 29-140, thanks to the vision of then Speaker Judy T. Wampat. Of course, Vince Leon Guerrero reminded me maybe a year or two ago that the conversation of charter schools, or some variation thereof, is not a new one. It's been happening even way before that, but it was Speaker Wampat who was able to pass the law, and Felix Camacho, the former governor, who had the fortitude and at least the confidence in what was to come in signing the bill into law. So thank you to both of those pioneers. The Charter School Council, I can get into some of that. The Charter School Council, as many of you know, I believe is made up of 8 members, Madam Chair. And they're responsible for approving, revoking, and there's another component in the statute, and establish probationary status to charters. We'll get to talk about the governance structure and how that could be improved. We also know that charter schools, by statute, have a board of trustees that are the fiduciary agents of each of the schools. And what that means is they're responsible for the overall financial health of the institution, and are ultimately responsible for the operations of the charter school. I know that the general public, and at least myself in the beginning of this legislative term, I wasn't quite sure where the lines were, and they might still be a little blurred in terms of oversight and governance and who's ultimately responsible. I think there's a gray area between the council and maybe some of the boards of trustees. And so we can probably address that in the agenda as well. Does anybody here at the table have anything to contribute in terms of the statute, the legal history? Ma'am, please, Vice Chair Gutierrez.
Thank you, Senator Castro, and thank you for inviting the Guam Education Board. I know that I was reminded that we were not on the mailing list. Anyway, I'm here. I was on the board when this charter school started, and I saw some people that were against it, but now they're in the garden, I would say. I read this charter school law, and there is a need to review this law and go over every section, because a law is good if it's followed. But in this charter school law, chapter 12, 17 GCA, Guam Academy Charter Schools Act of 2009, there is a lot of sections here that are not being followed. And I provided you a book that the Superintendent of Education and I attended in Atlanta, Georgia, and the session of the National State Board of Education really is on charter schools. And I hope that that will give you some heads up of what the charter school is supposed to be. But this law, this existing law, is not being followed. So it's useless to have this, and it's not being followed by the charter schools. Okay? So I hope that you form the committee, an ad hoc committee, to really go to every section of this law, and let's see what here needs to be amended, to be deleted, because it's not being followed. And I will question some of this here in some charter school, in the two charter school. But I just want to, that we have the law, but this law is not being followed. Even the composition of the charter school council members is not being followed, because it's patterned on after the Guam Education Board composition of board members, but it's not being followed. So I just want to share that, because the Guam Education Board, I want to make very clear, the Guam Education Board really should have a role, because when I gave you this book, you can see who is really the authorizing body and who oversees the charter school. So I just want to bring that up, Senator, that form your committee to review the current law, because a lot of the law is not being followed. There's an amendment to the law, and even the amendment to the law, it's still not being complied with. Thank you.
Thank you, Vice Chair. I appreciate your input. And again, just for those who may have come in a little later, the second item in terms of next steps, mid-April, I intend on having a roundtable focused specifically on issues of governance. You'll also see on page 9 of the slides that I provided to folks in the room that we can go ahead and open that wide open once we get to that slide. But before I move forward, I'd like to ask if there are representatives from CIFA here. Could you hold your hand up? Okay, great. And then is there a representative from Career Tech? Career Tech in the room by chance? Okay. I just wanted to go ahead and give you the opportunity to sit with me at the table, or anybody else for that matter, members of the council, Mr. Anki Tovis. Folks, these seats are not reserved, so feel free to come on up. I assure you I think I'm of proper hygiene, so please come on up. And with the exception of Joseph Nakastine, this could be his seat, but everyone else, you're more than welcome to join me. So let's move on. Madam Chair, Madam Public Auditor, please.
Thank you very much, Senator, for holding this roundtable. I think any kind of roundtable is a good and healthy discussion. I would like if Mrs. Gutierrez could maybe for the record maybe submit to the committee the concerns that she has more specifically as to what areas of the law are not being followed, because I'm not exactly sure, and I'm not here, but for clarification, so we can look at that, because we did finally issue the first audit on iLearn, and we looked at various areas. and we advised them. We have not had an opportunity yet to look at GACs because there is some funding issues there, and the audit has not actually begun, all right, because of some funding issues there. And so I think on a moving forward basis, it would be good for, if the Board of Education or Mrs. Gutierrez herself could submit to the committee as well as to the council those areas that she feels or the board feels that are not being followed. Yeah, and that way we can try to resolve those areas. Thank you.
Chair.
I do want to assure everybody that we are working to follow the law. Our council is dedicated to ensuring that we follow the law. Obviously, we are a part-time body. We do not have an executive director or any support staff. So that has been one of our challenges. And I know Enki and the rest of our council members will agree that it is hard. You mentioned earlier that the council's main responsibility is approving charters, denying charters, probation. Obviously, our scope has expanded, though it's not listed in the charter school law itself, but that is what has become expected from the Charter School Council itself. But I do want to assure everyone in this room that our council is committed to following the law. I believe the decisions that the council has made in the last year that I've had the honor of being the chair, as part of it, we've demonstrated as such.
Thank you. Let's go ahead and move on. This is the opportunity, unless the superintendent wants to jump in before he heads to another appointment. Feel free to just jump in anytime, okay, John? Otherwise, we're at the point in the agenda where we get to hear from each of the charter schools. And again, if I could just restate, this roundtable is designed to provide everyone with an opportunity to learn a little more about not just the governance of charter schools, but about the charter schools themselves. So, you know, as many of us know, there are 4 charter schools that have been approved, 1 conditionally, and we'll try to understand what that means as we get to them. But we have Guahan Academy Charter School. Is the representative here at the table? Oh, great. Come on to the table. If I can have 1 or 2 of you up here, or both of you, love for you to talk very briefly. Just introduce yourselves and as you come up, and maybe provide some background. And as you're situating yourself, for the record, Guahan Academy Charter School was the first charter school approved in 2010. It opened its doors in 2013. And I believe my number may be wrong here, but the enrollment stands at 976. You can correct me. And they focus on direct instruction as the primary mode of instruction at the school. For those who are not aware, I think one of the distinguishing factors of a charter school when compared to a district school is their focus on 1 or more things that would make them a center of excellence. And so this would be one of those limited opportunities where we can learn a little bit about each other. So, sir, if you can introduce yourself, your title, and maybe just a broad background about Guahan Academy.
Yes, thank you very much, Senator. My name is Hendrik Ivluk, and I am the Vice Chair of the Board of Trustees, Guahan Academy Charter School. My apology that my chairwoman is not able to attend this meeting, but she's off island anyway. My background is in the area of business and finance. That's all I can say at this time. Thank you.
All right, we certainly could come back to you. We have iLearn Academy here. I had the privilege, we can come back to you. I had the privilege of visiting your school yesterday as you opened up for your WASC accreditation visit, right? And so maybe if you could just introduce yourselves and share a little bit about your school as well.
I'm Helen Nishihira, the Chief Operations Officer, and to my left is Rachel Alquero, Director of Curriculum and Instruction. We had our visit with WASC on Monday, and they spent the whole day there, interviewing our teachers, our parents, the administration, our board members. We are a STEM school for elementary. We have 500 students currently enrolled from kindergartens through 5th grade, and I'm not sure what else you want.
We'll open it up as soon as everyone loosens up. I can tell folks are a little reserved. I'd like to hear from CIFA. The CIFA rep is here. Just introduce yourself.
Thank you, Senator Castro. My name is Ron Ravella, consultant for CIFA. Science is fun and awesome, and I believe the name stands for more than what we're going to be able to have the kids expect, but really more in line with what our true focus will be, which is the STEAM-based curriculum: science, technology, engineering, arts, and mathematics. And we're the new kids on the block, and we're really excited to be able to be a part of this family. And we're looking to learn, whether being the youngest, we want to learn from our siblings here, elder siblings, and be able to, of course, draw upon the expertise of the public auditor, Mr. Fernandez, and everybody else on the board. We appreciate the opportunity to have been chosen, and we look forward to really developing not only our upcoming beautiful facility that we're renovating right next to the Teton High School, but also at the same time, we're looking forward to sharing a lot of the cutting-edge technology that we feel that may be able to help the island community, not only in terms of robotics, which we currently do for the island, but I think as a broader view of the island needs, I think we're in position to be able to share as much as we can, and that's what it boils down to, is really sharing everything that we can possibly share with everyone. Thank you.
Thanks, Ron. When do you anticipate your school opening its doors?
Well, aggressively speaking, we want to be able to open up this school year in August. And as it stands, we're really in a good position now in terms of renovations and everything else that may be needed in terms of organizing our internal operations. And I know that every day we're looking at marking off on our checklists here to be able to speak with the auditor's office and, of course, the Department of Education to make sure we're really in line. And we've got great leadership with Ms. Amanda Blas to really give us a good head start. And, with the support of the board, it's just incredible. So we're just slowly chipping away at that block and getting it started. And, of course, with GACS, having them use our facility for the field and the parking lot, it's just a great way of being able to share our resources of what we have here.
Proposed location?
The location beside Teason, right behind GACS Elementary and towards the left of the entrance of Teason High School. The former 911 building.
Okay.
Yeah. We own all 6 buildings there, and the soccer field, the parking lot, and the empty lot behind the post office. It's about 6 hectares of property there.
Thank you. Are there any questions for any of the charters at this point? If not, we can save some of that for the last 30 minutes or when we get into the other part of the agenda. But just out of courtesy to my counterparts, in the executive branch, we have Vince Leon Guerrero representing the Office of the Governor. Feel free to jump in at any time, Vince, if you have any comments or questions, and also John Fernandez again. So let's go ahead and move on. And I guess this is where all the fun begins, where we get to talk about some of the successes and maybe some of the challenges. And I'm just going to speak less here and take a lot of notes. But let's go ahead and start with, we'll do the reverse order. iLearn, if you can just share a few of the successes of your school and in a very frank way like you would with the WASC visiting team, talk about some of the challenges. Yeah.
We'll deal with the successes first. The school has garnered a great support from the parents. The kids are all saying that they love the school. Of course, any kid, no matter what school they go to, they'll say they love their school, they love their teachers. So that's one of the big things. But what we've noticed and have not been able to go ahead and put out there was our ACT scores is on an upward trend. But because we only have 2 points on that trend, we can't actually officially declare it as a trend. So that's why we have not made any public announcements on the good report of our ACT scores. We'd like to do that when we complete our third year with the ACT. We've competed with the Math Olympiad, and as a first-time competitor, our kids came in third place with a whole load of schools. I think there were about 30 schools competing for Math Olympiad, and our kids came in third place, and they're really hungry to take that first place slot this year. So, sorry. I want to give a shout out to our Math Olympiad coach. We've participated in a lot of the academic competitions like Spelling Bee, Lego Robotics, and our kids are just really excited about that. One of the biggest programs we'd like to give a shout out for is our Farm to Table. We're moving, we have a small farm, and it's really small, but we've been talking a lot with different business community who are interested in helping us to get that into a full-blown farm to table where we can teach our kids about nutrition and sustainability and agriculture. So that's one of our big things, challenges. One of our biggest challenges is the funding, getting cut in the middle of the year, 8.6%, when we've already proceeded in a full speed ahead type of expenditure. So it's being able to find where we can cut corners at this time. But like everybody else in the government and the different charter schools, that we're going to rise to the challenge. We've had the team of teachers saying, look, you know, this is our school, we'll do what we can to help out. So they've all come together and made plans on how we can raise funds externally to help support the financing of the school outside of the government. So that's one of the things that we're working with. Our other challenge is, you know, everybody touts technology, but allowing our parents to understand what that actually means and that technology is for the students. So we've been able to brainstorm. That's the beauty about our school, is that whenever we come with a problem, we're able to really think out of the box. Even some of the kids, they come up with ideas, and so we have a lot of latitude to think out of the box and figure out how we would resolve this. So one of the things to resolve the technology issue was we were looking at some of the schools in the States who are doing extended learning time, where school is not just 5.5 to 6.5 hours long. We were looking at an 8-hour school day for the kids, and working that into a teacher's schedule where the teacher works 4 days out of the week and stagger so that the kids can meet the 8-hour time. So all their academics is done in school, projects, worked with a teacher who understands what's going on in the classroom, and help the parents out, because some of them, even with basic math, it's a struggle for them. So kids come back with homework not completed. By doing the extended learning time, kids go home and spend family time, as opposed to, Mom, help me with this homework, and an added 2 hours of the mother or father's day after a work day. One of the big questions with that is, aren't the kids going to be tired? Well, what we noted was a lot of the kids after 2 o'clock won't go directly home. They're actually at their parents' work, or they would apply for the after-school care. So they're not at home until after 5 o'clock. So why not be with a teacher who can help them through the academic period? And so that's one of the things that we're looking into.
Thank you. We have a question.
No, I just wanted to comment, and this is really for all of the charter schools. In the audit, it's often referred to as concentration of risk, and the risk that all of the charter schools have is the fact that in excess of 90%, almost 99% of their funding comes from the legislature, from the general fund. And of course, one of the things we noted in our review and in the highlights, you know, because iLearn has already issued its financial audit for FY 2017, is the fact that they had also already received the notice, and we understand in what's happening with the government, and you know, we said to them, hey, everybody's being affected. This is your share of the cut. But for all of the charter schools, it's called concentration of risk, because the risk is they are totally dependent upon the government of Guam for their funding, and of course that funding is given out monthly, and They will be challenged, so to speak, if that funding is delayed, because they have commitments also for payroll, for rent, utilities, and all of those things. So they're sort of like in a catch-22 situation, because for example, for this school to open, I'm not even sure if the budget is even there for them, because I don't even know if the legislature has actually made the appropriation for them to even open in August, because this is this current FY 2018 fiscal year, and you know everybody is being dramatically affected because of the Trump tax. So that's one of the cautions that for all charter schools, they do need to begin to try and find other monies to help supplement a little bit. When you have over 95% of your funding coming from one source, meaning the government of Guam, all of them are at risk.
Thank you for that.
So, not being on the Charter Schools Council, but having sat in on just about every charter school meeting as a representative.
I'm sorry, Vince, I mentioned you twice. Could you just go ahead and state your name and title for the record?
Vince Leongrel, I'm the Special Assistant for Education. And the prior council, which was chaired by Rosa Palomo, saw fit to invite the governor's office to sit in on all of their monthly meetings. And so one of the few people that have been on the council have attended the council meetings from the very beginning. I've got that historical perspective to provide. Absolutely correct. One of the biggest hurdles that every new school faces is the fiscal year versus the academic year. So fiscal year beginning in October, school starts in August, which is a prior fiscal year. And yet that's when they need to stand up, if it's a brand new school, they need to stand up operations probably in June, to be fair, so that they can start organizing themselves, hiring folks to get them on board, ensure they have a facility that's been approved and ready for opening come, when the school's supposed to open. One of the things I did want to speak to is that the strength of the third charter school, one of the strengths of that school is their financial resources that they bring to bear. They have assured the council that they will be able to open their doors in August, have a facility ready, and with an occupancy permit ready, without relying on government resources. They do not need the funding until the fiscal year begins. And so that made the application really, really strong in terms of reviewing their fiscal position and are they able to withstand the types of challenges that are being faced right now. Whereas everybody enjoyed last fiscal year $6,500 per student, we know already that a cut has been made based on the reduction to the Department of Education's budget. That pro rata reduction was also passed on to the two existing charter schools. And to date, they have been managing to do, just like DOE is managing to do with the reduced resources. What next fiscal year is going to bring, they were all warned in the last budget round that don't assume the $6,500 will be there, based on the reduction of fiscal year 18 and the projected larger reduction for fiscal year 19. So they all have been given notice, and it's up to them now and their boards to do the math and to work the budget and then determine whether or not they're going to be financially viable to move forward. So I just wanted to give note of that one of the things that we are taking a special note of, the council in particular is taking special note of, is the financial viability of schools as they apply and continue their operations into the future. Thank you.
Thank you. Those are all important points. It was raised twice in terms of the need to remain financially solvent and also the challenge in terms of planning. Actually, there are three overlapping cycles. You have the fiscal year, you have the academic calendar, and then you have the grants year that typically comes around June, if I'm not mistaken, May, June-ish for the call out and for the closure. So all of you administrators and educational leaders, I'm sure, John, you're all too familiar, especially board members at DOE, have those balancing acts to try and maintain. I'll go ahead and, oh, by the way, for the record, we have also another council member here, Ms. Yuka. So thank you so much for joining us, and feel free to jump into the conversation. If I could, I want to go ahead and ask Guahan Academy for another round, if they're more than willing to share with us maybe some of their challenges and some of their successes, especially the successes. And then we'll open up to a round of questions. I also see the education chairman here, Mr. Mark Mendiola, so you're more than welcome to come up to the table. And John Fernandez will open up to the two of you right after Guahan Academy has the opportunity to address or share some thoughts at the table. And then there's a hand up here, and we'll go ahead and get to after Guahan, and then to GEB and Mr. Fernandez. Guahan Academy?
Well, thank you very much once again. As a volunteer that is not a full-time employee of Guahan Academy Charter School, I can admit that I am not very well versed on success and strengths, but there are some general information that I am proud to say. Number one, our strengths, the academic performance of our students. It is something that I believe is one of the primary goals of the educational institution, is to provide quality education to the students, and that's one of the things that I am so proud about. Number two, I came to realize that when it came to the point of reduction in the number of students attending Guahan Academy Charter School, one thing I was so proud about is to realize that the students did not want to go. They did not want to leave the academic charter school. That's one of our strengths, I believe. In terms of challenges, I think everyone knows that we're still striving to get a permanent location for the academic charter school. And last, which is, I think it's most important one, the challenge that we face is the halt of our disbursement request to keep us moving forward. That's all I can say, but I would resort to my consultant because she is very much well-versed in everything on a daily basis about the charter school. If you may allow, Merlin Manipusan, she can talk more about the challenges and successes of CACs. Thank you.
Oh, I'm sorry, I'm remiss. Hafaday, Senator Manabusan, please, you're more than welcome to the table. As she's making her way up here, you know, I can also acknowledge with one or more of the charter schools, the strong parental involvement. I'm glad to see it's consistent with your school as well. The issue of attrition I want to raise at our next meeting, attrition of faculty or the reverse, the retention rate, but also the attrition of students, or I guess in the more positive note, the persistence rate. And I think some of these indicators of success are important when working with our partners at DOE, so we can sort of provide some relative gauge in terms of how well we're doing as a charter community. And so thank you for calling forward Senator Manabusan. Again, we're giving everybody the opportunity to speak briefly about some of the successes and challenges with your charter school. And if you could open by identifying yourself, your name, your role, and the school you represent.
Biba Mes Tomorrow and Jesus Mahasi. I think what Acting Chair Trustee Evelyn said, and just to have a synopsis of we take pride mainly on one of the real purpose of why charter schools are created by the Guam legislature. And if you're not familiar with it, you know, the purpose is a very significant part of why this legislature created charter schools. First, it really saw that families should have a choice in public education. And we took advantage, I think the founders of the charter school took advantage of that. We are the first charter school. There isn't any template. We learn, we are at an infancy stage. There are conflicts in the charter law, and I hope that the good chairman would go into those particular sections of the law later. But to concentrate on on our successes and our challenges. I am very proud to have with us the Dean of the Secondary Campus, Terry Cruz, and Dean Mofness apologized that she had other pressing moments that she had to attend to, or meetings that she had to attend to. But, you know, the purpose, our successes is first of all to look at our charter. And the main question for charter schools and for renewing charter schools and for petitions of ongoing charter schools is to go back to the purpose, the enabling legislation. So the question is, on the purpose of improved student learning, section 12102, did we do this? Yes, we did, sir. Did we increase learning opportunities for all students with special emphasis on expanded learning experiences? Yes, we did, and we did it also with a pre-K, and I understand that we're not going to be opening a pre-K next year, and if we are going to open a pre-K, it would be through funding other than local funding. So I thank the council for that. I believe that that was a fair response. C, did we encourage the use of different and innovative teaching methods? We did. We believe in the methodology of direct instruction. It's a proven technology. I mean, it's a proven methodology. And our student scores, our evaluator, our independent evaluator can approve to that. Dr. Velma Sablan every year puts out a report to the council. We attach it to the annual report, and those reports are given to the council and are public documents. So if everyone wants to have a copy of that, sir, we will be more than happy to provide the annual reports. That would be inclusive of our independent audit, the independent evaluator assessments of our scores. D, did we create new professional opportunities for teachers, including the opportunity to be responsible for the learning program at the school site? Yes, we did, and I'd like to have our dean amplify that particular section. E, did we provide parents, guardians, and students with expanded choices in the types of educational opportunities that are available within the public school system? We tried. And I think in response to a valid question that was raised by the council about our pre-K program, it's also a valid concern by the accreditation on our pre-K. We explained that if there was an error, we did have authority because our charter did provide for a pre-K program, and it was supposed to start in its second operations. So if you look back at our 2010 charter, it provided for a pre-K that was supposed to have been open in our second year. And why we didn't open in our second year? Because DOE hasn't opened their pre-K. So when we saw that they were trying to open theirs and they were budgeted in the fiscal year 18 for 1 million something, we opened our pre-K also, inclusive of the 1,015. And that was a very successful program, and it still is. We have 64 students, but that only cost charter school $460-some thousand. So while it cost DOE $1 million, it only cost us $400-some thousand for our pre-K. So that is no longer, it's a moot issue. F, the last one, hold the schools established under this chapter accountable for meeting measurable student educational standards. And we measure them. We did a district-wide assessment. We did it with the SAT-10 initially because we went ahead and did our SAT-10 tests, and then, you know, Dean Cruz, just please go ahead and chime in if you want to expand on this. So when we did the SAT-10, it showed that we used the SAT-10 with DOE, and I wish Dr. Velma Sablan, she's off island, but I wish she was here. She would explain that the SAT-10 test showed that our students excelled over the district schools, except for a few schools that were teaching direct instruction, which is our methodology. Then we went and we did an ACT Aspire. Then We're not able to do continuing district-wide assessments because we were not able to get the SBA test and the Act Aspire. The Act Aspire we did, the information. But I want to thank DOE Superintendent Fernandez, because today we have 2 of our counselors attending the training on how to actually look at the Act Aspire and SBA tests. So we thank you for that invitation. We've gone from, we are on our 5th year, and we've gone from 515 students to 937 students. Why 937? Because it is important to note by this committee that the approved charter in 2010 approved up to 1,015 students, okay? Of course, the legislature is the ultimate body in the appropriations, so it capped our funding at 740 for this fiscal year. The challenge there was the council had directed us and instructed us to modify our fiscal year 18 spending plan. We did. We provided them with that fiscal year 18 spending plan. We further modified that budget by the directed budget cut of $416,000, and then we also presented that to the council. So our budget is given to the council, illustrating all of those, the budgets cuts. What is GACS doing with regards to, so that's where our strength is that we have graduated 2 students. We initially we graduated 10 last year, and through the adoption and incorporation of our online program called Edgenuity, which is a WAS adopted online. It's an accredited online learning tool. We are going to be graduating 30 students. So, and that's 15 more than the 15 seniors that we enrolled. So we tip our hat. We say, Biba, Guahan Academy. That's one thing. We are proud, even with the efforts of having to alert the parents that they need to, we need to address the budget count, the budget cut of 740. Parents did not withdraw their students. And I mean, and for whatever reasons, we have parents who sit. Trustee Eveluk is a parent. We have employees who are parents, and there are parents here who want to speak on why they wanted to stay at Guahan Academy. The question is, if Johnny Boy came from, and this is a question, if Johnny Boy came from this public school and is given to the Guahan Academy Charter School, his value is reduced from where he came from over to 6,500 over at the Guahan Academy Charter School. The Board of Trustees and the administrators made a decision to actually go ahead and keep the students and try to make some budget adjustments. So we are trying our best with a lot of difficulties. So I'd just like to have Dean Cruz just make a few statements on some of our strengths. We are a new school. We have been challenged by several other things, but we're very proud of our students, and we wouldn't have these students without dedicated faculty. And I want to really, I really want to say for the record that Guahan Academy Charter School, they're so proud of our faculty that we brought in 5 trained instructors from NIFTY to train 98 or more of our faculty staff, and instead of having to do piecemeal. So we brought that in for our in-service training that lasted for 10 days, I believe. So I think that those are our We believe that we continue to be faithful to our charter in the midst of all the, the challenges of a budget crisis and all. But if I may, I'd like to just have her say a few things.
I guess I'm just going to reiterate what Ms. Manabusan said, but we did, in our scores, based on our evaluator, our independent evaluator, she did mention that we did score higher in some areas of the test than the other schools, most especially in the reading area, I guess because we delve a lot into reading, language, and math. Our teachers are, like she said, we brought the best in. Since we were using direct instruction, we brought the best people in. They're directly from NIFTY, who came and trained the teachers for a 2-week period. And the thing about our NIFTY program is that it's constantly being monitored for student progress and student success. And we not just look at the student concerns, but we also take a look at the instructional area. And for students and we started off with the Literacy Academy for some of our students, but then because we've identified that a lot of our students have gone beyond the Literacy Academy, we are now implementing the Edgenuity, which is a blended learning type of methodology. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Ms. Cruz, and thank you, Ms. Van Bussen.
Yeah, just for point of record, sir, there is a document or a piece of paper that's being passed out. I just wanted to correct so everybody has the correct and accurate information. Ms. Rowena Zacharias is no longer a member of the board, and I would like to recognize Ms. Rosie Tanaitango, who is now a member of our Board of Trustees. And we also have Dr. Jackie Cyrus here. We have Mr. Victor Perez, and Ms. Ovalis is off island. Joseph Cabana is no longer our finance officer. He's resigned, so that should be stricken out. And Mr. Rapadas is no longer a legal counsel, and it would be Mr. Phil Torres. Just so we could have those corrections for the record. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, ma'am. I know the education chairman and superintendent have to leave, but the chair of the council wants to just give a brief clarification for the record.
I just wanted to provide some clarification to some of the points that Ms. Manabusen did bring up. She did bring up that in the upcoming school year, there will no longer be a pre-K for Guahan Academy Charter School. And I did want to explain the council's decision process and making that decision. According to the law, charter schools can have kindergarten through 12. While I understand there is a comparison to DOE opening their preschool, I don't believe there is a law barring the Department of Education from opening a preschool, whereas when it comes to the charter schools, they are limited to kindergarten through 12. I know that it was a small portion of the budget, but as was brought up earlier by our board, or the Education Board Vice Chair, it's important that we stick to the law, and I believe that is an example of how the Charter School Council has stuck to the law and has reviewed a provision of the law. And I do want to assure everybody that this provision is going for all schools. We also have another elementary school that could possibly look at opening a pre-K, and we did make it clear with them as well that under the law that is not possible. The second thing I did want to bring up was the enrollment. So of course there is expected enrollment numbers listed in a charter. And while I understand, and of course it's extremely important that all of our charter schools are faithful to their charters, it's also important that they are faithful to the law, which goes back again to the law. And I believe my two council members here will agree, as this is something that we have discussed very thoroughly since we all took our terms last year. In the specific charter school law, it mentions that charter schools must follow all laws that do apply, and the budget law does apply. So there is a cap in the budget law that says the student enrollment and the number. So I just wanted to offer those clarifications as to why those decisions were made from this council.
I thank you, Madam Chair. And if I could, Mr. Superintendent and Chairman Mendiola.
Thank you, Senator Castro, for the opportunity to, sorry I was a little bit late, but we're going to be asked to excuse a little bit. We got some support from the private sector to help out the Department of Education, so we're going to go and get that support. There's a couple of things that we as a board, the Board of Education, kind of after reviewing the charter school law and what our role and responsibilities are with respect to the Guam Education Board. We find some certain gaps within the law that doesn't technically allow us the oversight, and that's placed on the Charter Council, and we respectfully appreciate their review and of the different charter schools. I guess the message from our board is really about accountability and getting information that will kind of, after all, these are all public school children, no matter how you dice it. I mean, they're all public school children, and we need to figure it out, and I'm glad that the senator here has put us around the table, all those involved, so we can kind of iron out some of the issues facing our education system. Of course, we're kind of concerned about the budget, and we talked about choices that folks want to choose to go to charter school or to the traditional school. I think one of the challenges that we face as a board is we supervise a superintendent. And basically, the superintendent and our team, our internal audit team, devotes a tremendous amount of time in dealing with issues that come up with charter schools, and I think that could cause potential conflict. But in addition to that, it also stretches our resources pretty thin. And I'll give you an example. Our internal audit office, aside from addressing some of the issues and challenges we're facing, they have 10 days by law to basically validate certain information that's coming in from the charter schools. And so this is a matter of policy and a matter of certain things that we need to iron out. And in addition to that, we have the superintendent who's dealing with 41 schools and 4,000 employees, 31,000 students. And of course, we're going through accreditation processes and all that stuff. And I think it's very important and it's prudent on our part. I've sat on accreditation teams before. I've been a part of it. And I think it's very important. This is one way an external source can come in and validate what we're saying is true, whether or not we're providing that quality education that people tend to espouse in terms of the work that is put out there. But when you do a self-study review and you do a full review, it basically highlights your points and your weaknesses. And I guess even in the business sector, you do a SWOT analysis basically to kind of determine how well you're operating. And of course, the Department of Education has been around many moons, and this is one of the mandates by the government. However, just looking at the way the charter school law was set up, it kind of creates a lot of, there's a lot of gaps. And I think as you and your the subcommittee and the Committee on Education review the law, Senator, that you folks take a hard look at the Department of Education's involvement with the charter schools. I have testified before the legislature before that either you give us complete oversight of it, or you basically remove the Department of Education and charge another organization or body, which I believe the Charter Council has been doing, and through the leadership of the chairperson, we've actually been communicating more than ever, and we're able to kind of address some of these issues as it pertains to the Department of Education. So I think, and I'm glad the OPA is here, because there's always been charges out there with respect to accountability and public funds and issues of procurement and all these things. Do they fall under the Government of Guam procurement rules and regulations? Are they held to the same standard as the Department of Education? I mean, just taking a cursory view of it, I think they are, because it's public funds. And so I think that needs to be very clear to everybody around the table, that if the Department of Education is going to be sharing its funds to help with the charter schools, that they too also go under the same scrutiny that we undergo. And I think it's very important. And, we had a very stressful situation a couple months ago. And I made it a point, and Ms. Gutierrez here, my vice chair, we made it a point to be aware of the situation, because we're very concerned. I mean, we got children that are transient. They can go from charter school to public school, or public school to charter schools or even to the private schools and vice versa. But at the end of the day, it's what are we doing to ensure that the quality of education and the resources that we're spending to educate these children are being used for its maximized and used for its intended purpose. So I think it's very important, sir, I guess to kind of just wrap this up, is that if we're going to set the standard and if we're going to set the level in which we hold ourselves accountable, then it should be across the board. I think accreditation is one, that if we're going to ensure that we have certain standards for the schools, then that would be great. But the other point I also wanted to, I just thought about this, is the 14 points. How does the 14 points of education pertain to the charter schools? I think that's a big question, and maybe we can have Bob Kalitsky give an opinion on that 14 points, because he's holding us to that, and it's public funds, and there's a lot of issues there, and I think that's very important that someone give an opinion on that and see how that pertains to us. So I just wanted to thank you, Senator, for allowing me the time, and I look forward to a healthy discussion and ways to kind of solve some of the challenges and issues. But I respectfully request that your committee take a look at really what role the Department of Education, the Guam Education Policy Board plays, because at this point I just get pretty much an email saying there's a request for drawdown of funds. That's about it. That's all I can really. And then I have to communicate with the Guam Charter Council to ensure that there's no issues or anything like that. But we just need some clarity in some of the areas that are very gray for us. And I'm going to advocate again for our superintendent to have him focus on the challenges that's at the Department of Education, the 41 schools, and then also to free up our folks over at the internal audit so that we can have them focus on some of the pressing issues within our department. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and Mr. Superintendent. I know you both have to leave for another commitment. Those are all valid points, and I underscored your request for the second time. I think it's going to be a good, healthy discussion down the line, Vince, and with the board, because the issue of the 14 points, there are certain requirements. I was there, public law was passed, 2648, if I'm not mistaken, and I think that's a great baseline. But I think even greater is going to be the debate in terms of instructional quality, whether certification guarantees a quality instruction or not. That's the greater debate. And so if we must amend the law to accommodate the independent or charter school entities to work around the law because they're delivering the results. You see, in my humble opinion, and I don't speak for anybody else, we usually set the parameters of engagement and a baseline when we believe that we're not meeting the minimum standard required of our kids. But when you excel, when you're producing excellent students who matriculate into the workforce, who exceed the minimum or the standard, then you're doing something right without having necessarily to hamstrung yourself to a certain set of requirements that weren't necessarily designed for you. Now, I will abide by the request and send that to also my counterpart, my chairman, good Senator Joe Sinagsin, because Mark Mendiola and I work regularly together on a lot of these important public policy issues, but I would even love to seed that debate here, not here as in today, but at this group of people to challenge the status quo. Because the good thing about public law is it was designed and passed by man, and we can change it the very same way it was adopted. And so I appreciate, and women, men and women, but that got me in trouble, I'm sure, with my partner at home. Thank you, gentlemen. You know what? In an ideal situation, 90 minutes would have been perfect. And the vice chair kicked us off into some of the more salient issues facing our charter school communities. What I'd like to do now is give everyone, if you could keep your comments under 3 to 5, there is no limit on the freedom to express yourself. I'm just asking you to be considerate of others. There's probably 36 people in the room. So I want to, this meeting was designed primarily for the charter school representatives and of course our stakeholders who help us provide some form of accountability, and then the listening audience, the others here can also chime in. So we'll start with charter and the board member here. Let's go ahead and address on the next page of the agenda. And by the way, this is definitely not the last opportunity we get to pick up where we left off. So I'm just trying to honor everybody's request to be dismissed before 11 o'clock. And so, not that I have anywhere to go, for the record. I'll be happy to stay as long as you want. But let's go ahead and, again, for the purposes of providing a broad stroke, go down the line in no particular order, but I prefer if we can go clockwise. Issues associated with charter schools. There are 4 basic areas: governance, funding, student achievement, operations, which includes facilities and transportation. And so maybe iLearn, if you want to start, if you have any concerns about governance, maybe just 1 or 2 key points, and we'll go around the table and then come back. And that includes yourself, Madam Chair. Yeah, just governance for now, and then we can come back around. Great. No problem. So before we move to the chair, Vice Chair Gutierrez, did you want to comment? I know you shared some of your thoughts about concerns, the gaps in the law as Chairman Medina. Oh, okay. Okay. Boy, this thing amplifies my voice. Usually I'm not that loud. Madam Chair, if you could.
I think it's been mentioned numerous times already, but definitely accountability. Also, I believe there has been an issue with one of the schools when it comes to a clear structure. One of the council members, Enki, has brought it up numerous times about a clear structure for when it comes to who is in charge of the school and in charge of operations. So that's definitely something that comes to mind. But I believe accountability and definitely that structure are 2 of the things that have come up in numerous discussions.
I think that's an excellent point. Thank you. Public Auditor, ma'am?
As I have said for the record in the past, and I continue to chastise ourselves again, we inadvertently were not aware of our own mandate to ensure that the financial audits of the different charter schools were done. In our own review, we did find that they were done, some possibly not in accordance with the way we would do it, but like in the case of iLearn, we did issue it under our oversight. And, broadly, one of the things that we do remind them, they are subject to GovGuam procurement regulations. We do look at the composition of the board to ensure that does it meet the structure. We also look at whether or not they have sought or in the process of seeking accreditation. And in the case of iLearn, we did note that, and now I'm happy to hear that they already got their visit after we've issued the, So those are the more broad things that we do look at. We did meet, for example, with the council to hear their concerns. It was a very good, a very productive meeting. And the next audit that we're awaiting to review is the Guahan Academy audit. And as I mentioned earlier, there are some funding issues, and I'll be sending a letter to the chair and regarding the start of that audit. But again, now that we're here, we are looking more broadly at those. And we welcome, Senator, any concerns you might have that we can address, because when we do hear certain concerns, we do take that and discuss them with the folks. We've already had our entrance conference, for example, with GACS, and we're just waiting now for the start of the audit before we will meet with them. But the good news is, even though OPA was not involved in the earlier days, all of them have been audited. Okay, they have not necessarily posted it on their website, but it has been audited.
Thank you, ma'am. Vince.
Previous to this subcommittee or committee being established, there was a dialogue that was initiated by Council Chair and myself with Chairman Joe San Augustine. And there was some issues that we brought to his attention relative to inconsistencies in law or clarification in law. And I think a future discussion, perhaps by people emailing to you as the chair, their thoughts and ideas on what needs to be amended in the law. And I want to go back to some of the basic tenets of why charters exist. And I think Ms. Manibusan provided some of that. But one of the things that we need to remember as we talk about the 14 points of the Adequate Education Act being applied to the Department of Education doesn't mean that that should also be applied to charter schools. Because one of the distinctions of a charter school, publicly funded charter schools even, is that you have to give them greater flexibility. And that flexibility could be relaxation of expectations of public schools, not requiring them to meet the same 14 points of the Adequate Education Act. But in return, charter schools have to have greater accountability. And I think that's where the law can be strengthened. How do we have greater accountability? One of the challenges facing this council and the initial council, the previous council, there's only been two, is this is a volunteer council, people who have stepped up to the call from the governor to serve, and they don't do this full time. And yet, the expectation of developing, promulgating rules and regulations to implement the act has languished because who has the time? Ms. Yuka doesn't have that, Mr. Anki doesn't have it, Ms. Amanda doesn't have it. Who has the time to do that? Unless it's something that Committee on Ed wants to share resources and expertise, that's clearly doable. And in this financial picture, it's hard to justify any executive director position to be given to the council. So that remains a challenge. Carrying out the responsibilities of law, I see great effort on schools and on council's part, but it is a tough, tough challenge for them to do that. So I just want to remind people that as we look with a critical eye to the existing charters and to the new charters that are coming online, remember that they were created to offer parents a choice, and sometimes those pressures, it's not fun to be in, but it's good for the system because inertia is a very powerful force in any system. And in the system of public education, inertia is super, super strong. Changes don't happen because people willingly want to change. Competition provided by charter schools and the parents voting with withdrawals and enrollment in a charter school, in my mind, is nothing but good for the public schools. It will drive them to reevaluate how they provide services and how they service kids. And if there's a lack and there's a gap and the charters are being created and envisioned and authorized because we now have a direct instruction focus, we now have a technology focus, we now have a STEAM focus, we now have a career tech focus, that can't help but be good to drive improvement in public education overall. So I just want to remind people that there's got to be a balance to this. It cannot be the same. Equity is not the same treatment. So we need to remember that. So the refrain that I will have representing the governor is that we support charter schools. We want charter schools to be successful, and to the degree that we can amend the law so that it is more functional in supporting the council and the schools and ensuring that only viable applications become authorized charters, and authorized charter schools are held accountable to the greatest allowability in law. I think that is good for us to continue to do. Thank you.
Thank you, Vince. I think we're consistent on a couple points. Somebody's clapping for you. We're consistent on the notion about what parts apply to what entities. But I appreciate your perspective about the challenges associated with this. Being an educator, when I reached out to Senator San Agustin for the opportunity to be an active voice in the charter community, as teachers, we're in the business of providing solutions and being positive. We're in the business of positivity. And so the committee was formed, and here comes the cash crisis and some challenges with the governance structure. So boy, do I have my hands full. But I appreciate that, Mr. Leandro, and representing the governor's statement.
A balancing statement. And I also appreciate the Guam Education Board and the superintendent. The funds are coming out of their budget. That makes it really, really tough on them to look at this money being drained out of their account. And so what additional role and responsibility in amending the law can be granted to them so that they can at least feel like we have a say and we're comfortable that if we're going to lose money because they offer a better product than we do and we're not competitive yet, right? What role can we play so that we're making sure that our money is well spent on existing schools or new charter schools? I totally agree that they've got to have a stronger role and responsibility. What that means, I don't know, and that's why we need to continue to look at the existing law and improving it. Thank you.
Definitely wise words of encouragement. Before we go on to the next speaker, we're still on the issue of governance, and then we can transition to funding. Just keep that in mind, but I do want to thank representatives from the university community. I'd like to make it a point next time to officially invite them to the table as we discuss the overall strategic direction of charter schools and public education holistically, and that we'll reserve that part of the agenda for the next time we meet. I don't think we're going to be able to get to that. I hope we can even finish the remaining slide or 4 points on the agenda, but we'll continue with that said on the issue of governance. Ms. Cruz, or you can pass it down around the table. So you could speak, or Ms. Menabusen. Again, the question would be for those at the table, if you see any challenges in terms of governance, whether it's your school or the council or the education board or even folks who represent you in the legislature, particularly myself.
It came to mind when you mentioned University of Guam. We've had challenges with students wanting to do their, their student teaching at our school, where they apply, they go through the interview process, and we hire them. And then they start working, and of course the public schools begin, I guess, before the university classes begin. And so they start working for about 2 weeks, and then maybe about a month in, they come and tell us, oh, they've been given an ultimatum. They either stay and work at GACS and are not able to continue with their continue at UOG, or they resign from GACS and continue at UOG. So I'm just not sure where that's coming from. We did speak to Dr. Sablan about it, and but we just haven't heard. So
I think that's an important point. And you allowed me to see where I was deficient in my agenda. I should have incorporated public policy as part of governance. I don't know exactly where that's coming from, but it's a concern that goes back to my days at the university in the mid-90s. You know, there's a particular phrase in the statute, and somebody here with greater knowledge can correct me, that reads, in a school on Guam. And that has been strictly interpreted in the past, at least during my time, that a school on Guam, the spirit, at least the intent of the law at the time when you produce Teacher Corps graduates, is that you would matriculate into the Department of Education. And so the assumption then, or the articulation of that in terms of how it was operated on, meant DOE schools on Guam as opposed to private, or I guess I would have to assume in this case, charter schools on Guam. And so that's an excellent intersection of the past and what's happening today. I don't necessarily think that's an issue of accreditation more than it is an issue of strict interpretation of a school on Guam, which many have interpreted to believe, they believed it to be a public school on Guam, ergo DOE. And at the time I could see the need, because that's where we were deficient. As a former chief planner at DOE, historically every year we had maybe, Vince, 300 vacancies every summer. So we were always in a mad scramble to fill teacher positions because we usually, not recycled, but we strongly encourage and incentivize retirees to come back. And they would leave the option to come back at their discretion until, you know, it was suitable for them, but we always appreciated them. And I guess the point was Teacher Corps was meant to serve as a natural feeder into DOE, and I understand that. The real debate has to be now, do we construe charter schools as fitting that interpretation, or do we change the interpretation altogether if we adopt the perspective that we're one community, one education community, inclusive of private schools? And so thank you, Ms. Cruz, for bringing that up. That's an important public policy concern. Thank you. Did you want to continue, or did you want to go on? Okay. Senator Menabusen.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I will be very specific to the issues that you identified here under governance, Charter School Council. There are no words for, on behalf of Guahan Academy Charter School, as the first charter school to applaud the efforts of the members of the council, prior members and current members. What I would like to say is that this legislature failed to do what it's supposed to do, fund it. It did not fund the prior council operations, and it certainly hasn't given any funding for this council. It is not fair that these issues come before the council without having to have the administrative staff to actually do the work, and I want to be very specific to that. One of the things that they sit and they review everything. They should have a staff. The law, let's go to the law. The law is always thrown at our face. The law is the law. Well, the law says that the council should have adjudicated rules and regulations. They've been in existence since 2009. If you provide them the funding, if you provide them the necessary staff, how does the council, how do people, when you don't have any adjudicated rules and regulations, how do we know what the processes and the procedures are? You know, I mean, every time you have a member that sits there and then his term expired or her term expires, and have somebody else come and fill that position, that particular person may have a different perspective. But if your procedures, if your adjudicated rules and regulations are there, then it's not subject to arbitrary and unilateral interpretation. You have to have adjudicated rules and regulations. This body should fund the council. This body should get an executive director and fund the council so then it can get its rules and regulations in place. 2009, it's 2018. That is what we would like to ask you, Mr. Chair. We thank you for your chairmanship of this particular issue, charter schools, but let's be, let's be practical. They have a lot of work that they need to do, and they've done it. I mean, Mr. Leon Guerrero illustrated that they are volunteers. And so they've done their best, but I believe that we owe it to them, that we need to fund their operations and get them to do the adjudicated rules and regulations. As far as the Board of Trustees are, another thing on the council. If we are going to say that DOE, if you look at the charter law, if you're going to say that DOE, that the charter school is implemented to be separate from any rules, regulations, and everything from DOE, then let it be true. Let it be true. Why would you have the superintendent of the Department of Education and the council as a member? I mean, I know nobody wants to thread on that particular issue, but I'm here because I'm an advocate of charter schools. I'm here because I need to let you know that if we don't, like Mr. Leon Guerrero said, if we don't really clean up this charter law, we're going to be in battle with all of these conflicts. And so we have a third and a fourth charter school, and we have iLearn, and so we really need to look at the presence of DOE in a law enacted by this body that says the reason why we want to create charter schools is to separate it from DOE. How do you separate it when you make the superintendent a member? How do you make it when you make IAO and everybody else a DOE govern? There's another section in the charter law that says, right, that the charter schools shall exclusively handle their accounts. We are all for accountability. I mean, we are. We're not saying we shouldn't be. We are trying. Like we said, we're the first charter school, and we're trying our best. We don't do things purposely and intently so we could defy the law, but I believe that that's something that this committee should see. Going down to the Board of Trustees, and I'll limit that particular response to governance under Charter School Council. If we have to give a percentage of our budget to the Charter School Council? That's something that we want to say yes. But should that be perceived as a conflict of interest, having to take a percentage of Guam Academy's charter school's budget and give it to the council who monitors us? It should actually be a direct funding from the legislature. I mean, there was this novel idea of actually taking a percentage of our budget and giving it to them. If you, Mr. Chairman, and the legislature do not find a conflict in that particular issue, we're amenable to give part of our funding to the council. Okay, going back to the Board of Trustees. So the Board of Trustees, very specific in section 12108. It shall consist of not less than 5. It should have 1 member who is a parent or a guardian, and we have 1 member as a parent. 1 member shall be from the general public within accounting or finance, and we have Trustee Paris and Mr. Evelek, who both have an accounting and finance background. And the principal of the Academy Charter shall be a non-voting member. Well, the principal has been elevated to a dean. We have 2 deans, so both of them we consider. We've amended our bylaws to include both deans to be non-voting members of the Board of Trustees. More importantly, with the Board of Trustees on governance, shall we have a conflict of policy? We have a conflict of interest policy, which means no member of our Board of Trustees shall be an employee. Okay? You cannot sit and govern and decide on the budget and decide on hiring and everything and be an employee. So we want to make sure that we recognize that the Board of Trustees do sign a conflict of interest and a non-disclosure. So the Board of Trustees, if you want to amend that, it is at the pleasure of this body to amend it. I feel 5 members is, we have 5 now, not more than 9, and it's so hard to recruit. And so I just want to say that 9 members, I mean, the composition of the Board of Trustees for a charter school is not in question. It's just governance, conflict of interest, and to make sure that we comply with the section 12108. And that's all I have to say, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Manabusan. Mr. Evelek, would you like to add to the conversation? It's your option.
Yeah, thank you once again, Senator Castro. Since I first came in here, and it's pretty much like the common discussion is focused on the importance of a well-defined law for the charter school. That's the way I perceive it. And by listening to almost everybody talking in here, there is a need for clarifying the law. And many of those, I think, Merlin Manabusan has already discussed about. And to conclude, thank you very much for the opportunity to be here. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Yuka, would you like to contribute? You sure? Thank you. Mr. Toves.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just to be very clear, any of my comments are all mine and not the council or any of our school's position.
I'm sorry, real quick. Could you identify yourself and your role?
I'm Francis Anki Tovis. I'm the member of the council, and I'm the longest standing member of the council, almost 3 years. I just, in terms of governance, the chairwoman is correct, and Vince is absolutely correct, and same with the public auditor. And many of the comments that have been brought out are definitely correct. And they've worked with what was written within this law. It's not a perfect law. Obviously, it's not perfect. It's made by men, as you've well stated. And there are changes that we need to make. And this issue of accountability is rather troublesome that it's being brought out because, at least as I understand it, we have financial audits from a CPA firm. Who else has that? I mean, I really don't understand why this rock is being thrown at our glass house, so to say, that we somehow don't have accountability. Do we make mistakes? Absolutely. Have we made many mistakes? We probably have. And I still look at, do we have financial accountability? We do. Is it perfect? It is not. Do we have educational accountability? Are the kids learning, being taught, and are they learning in the environment that's provided? Absolutely, because our test scores at least show that. Are there problems in there? Yes, because one of the things it doesn't do is the district-wide assessments don't compare apples to apples or oranges, in that, what was it, the spelling and the math, or well, I can't remember now what was, forgive me, it's not my particular bailiwick, but you know, we try to do the assessments as best they can, and within the law that's provided and within the funding that's approved. But at least from the perspective of how the students learn and by grade, how do they perform against all kids in the GDOE system, and how do they perform nationwide? That is the specific accountability requirement that I bring up, and they hear, the schools hear it every single time this issue arises, is I always ask them, how do you stand against GDOE schools and the national average? And so at least I can, at least from what I'm told and what I have read, they at least perform to that level or better than DOE schools and are moving towards the national average. It's not perfect in every grade and with every school, but it's doing well. So at least those two parts, I would like to say, am I satisfied? No, there's a lot of improvement. It has to occur. And this issue of whether or not we have funding for a director, I'd like an executive director, and we've gone without it the almost 3 years that I've gone through. But, you know, Senator Manabusan is correct that, and the chairwoman is absolutely correct, that it's an impossible task to expect rules and regs from a part-time body that only should meet once or twice a month. And at least in this past year, I've been seeing us meet once or twice a week for half the day, as an example today. And so that's not a normal expectation of boards and commissions, and it's just because there are more schools. And I've sat where former Chairwoman Gutierrez has sat. I've been on the DOE board, once elected, once appointed. So I understand the frustration that happens and the funding that occurs. But as a public policy statement, charter schools are public schools. And I hope the press was here to at least reiterate that point. But charter schools are public schools. And I'm ashamed, being an alumni of the university, that the university makes that point of not accepting charter schools work in that in their process of student internships. That's rather frustrating and disappointing. I would expect that they understand the difference, and I hope that they soon will. It would be nice if the procurement law did not apply to the charter schools, and maybe some mechanism, because you're asking an entity, a non-government organization, non-profit, to implement a government rule. Now, where is that sanctuary, Catholic Social Services, Salvation Army, Cortec, any of those corporations? Well, Cortec's is a profit corporation, but where are they required to live by the Government Procurement Act?
Yes, thank you, Council Member.
Except that's run by the government of Guam. But as I get off my point, I do understand Mrs. Gutierrez's point about the funding issue. If that could be separated, that's amenable, and that's fine. That's true. But I do defer that GDOE has a public policy, at least oversight of the charter schools, and the fact that it is part of that education process of K through 12. And unless they are giving up their state function of education, then I believe there has to be some look at that. That's why I don't really have a major issue of the superintendent being on the council. I think it's the advantage of the superintendent on the council that we have the staff. It's definitely the use of the superintendent, his background, and the knowledge and capability of the staff is great. But I did want to focus on the areas that we do have accountability in terms of our finances and our student achievement. We have an excellent record of providing technology. As an example with iLearn, every one of their students has not an iPad, what do you call that? It's not an iPad, it's a pad, but it's a computer pad. So, you know, and they have it's not a whiteboard, what do you call the smart board? They have smart TV, you know. So the things that happen within the schools, I've not had parents say, oh, my kids don't learn anything, or my kids don't want to go to school. I've heard from both schools, parents and students, because I ask when I see them, what do you like about that school? They like the fact that their kids learn, their teachers teach.
Anki, thank you for your dedication to this. May I just make myself clear for the record? I know you mentioned procurement process is maybe not necessary, but I believe that procurement process is necessary because we're using government funds, and we should have some. We were just talking about having accountability, and that's one of the biggest things. My main concern with how each charter schools are using the funds that were given from Department of Education. So I just wanted to make that statement, that was his opinion as a council member, but I'm not in agreement that there shouldn't be a procurement process.
Let me just go ahead and jump in as the chair. It's nice to know we can even agree to disagree amongst ourselves in your own organizations. That's healthy. But I want to go ahead first to the to the chair of the council, and then of course the public auditor, and then I'm going to suspend the agenda. There's no way we're going to get through the last 2 points, and then I'm going to open it up for members of the audience or the public in general to provide some input or ask some questions. And so again, in that order, we'll go with you, ma'am, and then you, ma'am, and then ma'am, and then the two gentlemen. Okay.
So I do want to thank both of my council members for attending today's roundtable and for sharing their thoughts. Speaking on behalf of the council, I do believe it's important to add student achievement onto the agenda for the future. One of the concerns that Enki brought up is something that he's brought up previously. We know that DOE uses the ACT Aspire. One of the schools uses ACT Aspire, the other uses a different tool. So that's something that can be discussed in the future for clarification. Also, I just wanted to take note, I know in the packets that were provided, there is the member quorum law. Of course, we already mentioned earlier, the council has 8 members. We do have 6, and the council, just to be clear, the council has abided by the member quorum law, and we will continue to do so. We have had work sessions, but as we all know, work sessions are not required to follow open government law unless because decisions are not made at that level. But I did want to make that clarification.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I also fell victim to the open government law. I was hoping to have a work session without, just a casual conversation, and I got called out by my colleagues. And thank goodness in their infinite wisdom, because there's no way I could have fit all of you in my office, that's for sure. But to the public auditor.
As to the issue of Government of Guam procurement regulations, that was in the law, but let me just say this. We get money from the federal government. When we get money from the federal government, we have to follow the rules and regulations that the federal government does. So from a policy perspective, this was a policy decision on the part of the legislature when it passed to say that charter schools must follow GovGuam procurement regulations, and so therefore when you take money from a government, there are strings attached to it, and that is one of the strings. And so we can debate that, but until the legislature makes the decision to change it, that is the rule that we will follow.
Thank you. And there's no, thank you. Okay, just a quick response. We'll give you the opportunity, but I'd like to go to Vice Chair Gutierrez after that.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I want it to be the last because I want to hear what everybody has to say. First of all, I hear people say volunteer. The Guam Education Board are volunteers. And I know all of you also, and the two charter schools maybe are getting stipend because it's on the law. But we do volunteer work, and we could donate our stipend to the schools. I hear the chair of the council about accountability, and it's very important because there's a law, an amendment to Public Law 32-181 regarding authorizing, relative to authorizing funding for charter school, and it's authored by the Speaker B.J. Cruz. And I was at the hearing when charter schools were asking, even DOE say, remove the DOE. But it was because of accountability, because it's true. Charter schools are receiving local funding just like DOE. And that was the reason why the Speaker wanted that the DOE to have an oversight to review and verify for accuracy invoices and report its findings. And let me tell you, the office of the DOE Chief Auditor and the staff spend many hours when documents are received from the charter school verifying it for accuracy. There are invoices that are duplicate. I'm glad that they're all wearing eyeglasses so they know that it's a duplication. Documents that are missing. That takes a lot of our staff time to review that. I'm sure that, we're all in management, and before it leaves our office, we should make sure that all the documents are accurate. So it's in the law. That's why it goes to DOE. Mr. Tovis, the chair said, we agreed to disagree. Our students in the public school system are no different. We have students that are awarded with platinum in the high school because of their academic achievement. We have students that are being recognized. They're from public school, DOE. So this thing about the charter school is doing better than DOE, that's when I disagree with you. I have 2 great-granddaughters at a charter school. Only one is telling me that he really likes it. His mom doesn't have to shadow her every day. So I do support the charter school, but let's be real. 14 points. The 14 points should apply to the charter schools because it's out of the it's out of the local funding. We prepare our budget every year based on the 14 points. So I don't see why the charter school should not be included in the 14 points. When you talk about teachers, new teachers graduate out of GOG, we're competing with DODEA, remember. Because even the DOE, we are short of teachers because why? They're going to DODEA. Why? Because of the salary. So we're competing with DODEA. Now, some of those students at UG must be on a scholarship or on a grant, government grant. And it's part of the condition is that after they graduate, they come back and teach in the Department of Education. So maybe that's why they're leaving the charter school. But we look at the 14 points because that's how we base our budget, all the way down to the bus transportation. So accountability is very important. And I gave you, Chairman and Senators and August also, a book about the charter school. And I don't know if you guys, the charter schools, are a member of the National Charter School Council. That the governance is on the state board. Why we're saying that take it away from us? Because if we're not going to give us the authority over them, then what's the use? The budgets are submitted to the board. It's the famous saying of look, don't touch. And that's what we've been doing. And I know that you have former board members that were on that are now on the charter school, and they know what we had to go through. I questioned the first charter school. Why are you paying $36,000 for building maintenance when we don't even pay that at DOE? So its accountability is very important, and that is the reason that the DOE receives the invoice to validate. Because these are local funding. The public auditors talk about even federal grants, federal funding. Yes, a lot of this charter school, at least the 2 charter school, I hope the new one will come in and join later, is they're whole accountable for the federal grants. I know some of them are turned off by Mr. Ike Santos when they come to the training, and he accounts, he's on them. You sign in if you come in, and you sign out. Sign in if you're going to eat, because it's accountability. Accountability is what it is. And we are whole accountable at DOE. We as the board are whole accountable to the voters of Guam that voted us, accountable to the governor that appointed the 3 board members. We don't pay a consultant on our part as a board. We do our own research. We get the help of the AG if we're not so sure of legal requirements. Because we feel that every penny goes to the students. We are taking the cut. It is hurting us, but we have to swallow it. I feel for the council, because I know when the council first came in, these new council members now really cannot be blamed for what has happened in the past, because they're just new. At least now I see light at the end of the tunnel that they're going to hold accountability, hold the charter school accountable. But Senator, this law has to be changed to give the council more teeth over the charter school, more authority. Because they may have a board of trustees, they may have a board of whatever, but they have to be whole. They give them that authority, just like us. Our voters are Guam. The legislature, we come down here, we get scrutinized for our budget based on 14 points. So I made, this is where we tend to agree or disagree, but 14 points to apply to the charter school, because they're, like Mr. Tovey said, they're public school, and it's true. They're public school. Unless they're getting their own funding, and they don't have to get funding from the local government, then they can be considered otherwise. But as long as they're getting the funding, then they should be whole accountable. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. Tovis.
I appreciate what everyone has said. And obviously I stated that this is my opinion. The public auditor is correct, but I stated at the previous roundtable that this issue of the procurement law, at least in my opinion, I didn't think it should apply. But I'm also certified in federal grants financial management, and I've stated that that process and that review is probably better fitted to the schools than following the procurement law. Because what do you have to do? You basically have to go get somebody that's familiar with GovGuam procurement regulations and that process. And so in the spirit of trying to allow flexibility, you've already constrained the charter schools. And so I'm saying, yes, there are rules for acceptance of grants, and basically the funding is for local funding can be considered as a grant, except it's a local grant, and that instead of a federal grant. But the process for administering federal grants is probably a better and much more efficient method than the use of the GovGuam procurement law. And I do appreciate the points by Mrs. Gutierrez, and having sat on their side of the street, that they have some state authority for over charter schools, and I appreciate that, and I look forward to that, because both they and the superintendent have that authority and should maintain that. I don't know about the financial oversight, but I do think that there's a need for some of that.
Thank you, Mr. Toves. Thank you for being a good sport. I could tell you either were elected or appointed to some public body, but thank you for keeping a positive perspective. Okay, again, I'm going to now allow members of the audience to participate who have not already spoken. I think in order, Mr. Petit, we have about 4 to 5 minutes left.
I'll keep this very pithy. It's nice to hear all this nice dialogue.
Could you please identify yourself for the record?
Yes, James Petit, retired school principal, was a farmer consultant for the good senator here. Fortunately, budget cuts affect all of us, even though I love this guy like my own brother. But he axed me, but that's okay. I still love him. Anyway, it's nice to hear, some of the things that the prospective charter school, CIFA, a wonderful example of building capacity. It's not going to cost the government a nickel until the fiscal year. When you have charter schools that do things like that, to me, that it shows me as a principal that they're engaged in that process of making sure that, they become self-reliant, not reliant on the dole from the government. Another thing I wanted to say, good Senator, is that I agree with Senator Manabusan when it comes to the superintendent. To me, the law, there's clearly a conflict if he is on that council. He has to advocate for 31,000 students. He can't do that if he's conflicted with taking money away from the budget. Or what you do is you sever the budget, the funding source from GDOE, and you have a separate funding source for charter schools or other private entities that the government wants to undertake. And I think that that's something in that law that needs to be resolved. And I think that all of us here see this, and it puts the superintendent in a bad situation because he, like I said, he advocates for 31,000 students. When he's part of the process in the council, it's kind of undermining his role as a superintendent. Another thing is, I Learn Academy, I had the pleasure of visiting that school. I think that, the trajectory that they're on is a good trajectory. They have begun to build their capacity. I think that they've lived within their means when it comes to the limited resources that they have. And we saw some of the science projects that those kids were doing. And anytime a principal sees kids that are happy and that feel good about who they are, you've done a good job as a principal. You've met the needs that these kids have. So they need to be commended for the hard work that they've done the last 3 years of their existence. And good Senator, that's all I had to say.
Thank you, Mr. Petit. I appreciate your input. The gentleman to my left, if you could introduce yourself for the record.
My name is Theseus Mignola. I am a parent of a student at Guana Academy. I have been, I was a PTO president several years ago and then also joined the board for that 1 year. As far as the council members and then even the board members at the different charter schools, I realize the amount of time and sacrifice that you guys have to put in. It is voluntary based. I know we got a little $50 stipend whenever we got a meeting. Wasn't really, it's not something that I wouldn't consider this paid. But anyways, we were there. If I had a choice to not take it, I wouldn't take it at all because it was for me a voluntary basis. It was meant for my son and to make sure that his education was being facilitated in the way that I thought or that I would represent for the other parents. Yeah, just wanted to say thank you guys again, council members. I understand the sacrifice and stuff that you guys have to go through, and the amount of responsibility that you guys have to, that you have to put on your shoulders for our kids. I was looking back and I was listening to some people that were talking about the charter school and the oversight and the amount of time that's dedicated to oversee and make sure that the charter schools are actually doing what they're supposed to and following the law and stuff. To me, honestly, I thank the senators that had first introduced this charter school and gave that option for the parents. Definitely for me, it was a breath of fresh air for my son. His first years, he's been going there since he was 5 years old. So he was one of the first students to go in the school. I've been very happy with his outcome. He's very happy with the school itself. And I'm also very pleased with the faculty that are there. But in hindsight now, looking at it, the legislators at that time when they had made this law for the charter schools, I think they, with not purposeful, but they set it up to kind of fail, in a sense that having an oversight, the council to oversee the charter school and not have them be like a paid or a specific, have that background. Charter schools have been around since 1992 in the States. So we have at least bring in one person that knew how charter schools were supposed to be run to give us that guidance, to give us those first couple steps. So when I say that they set up to fail is the sense that, if I were to start a business, I would bring somebody in. If it's about financials and stuff, I'd bring somebody that knows that has the strength and the background, and that way anybody that follows after him, whether that person leaves, he or she leaves, they have that foundation to grow this charter schools. So now that it's happened, it's done, but what I'm saying is, like, in the future, right now, if you could provide some kind of legislation or funding for the council, that way, again, it's not that they don't take it seriously because they're not getting paid, but the thing is that, we need to have that dedicated administration to kind of overlook all the charter schools and make sure that they're, like Ms. Marilyn Mambusa said about them being in their infancy. So, where's the guidance? Where was the guidance put in there in the beginning initially to make sure that we don't make any of these false steps and issues that we're encountering now? So That, and then and also as far as members, keeping the parents their choice. You know, I would like to see, you know, as a parent, being involved in our children's education. I'd like to vote for our members the same way that we vote for our fine legislators. You know, keep our members accountable too as well. Whether, you know, because if you're going to be paying people to be doing these types of jobs and dedicate their time, and if the whole thing about the charter is having choice, then I think the parents should also have a voting, you know, to be able to elect our leaders in that school.
Thank you, Mr. Mendiola. I appreciate it. There is a closing comment from Eilern, and then I'm going to wrap up with some announcements that I have to make.
Thank you, Senator. I just wanted to say that, you know, I'm really happy that we were able to do this, but one of the things that doesn't come out in this kind of talk is the relationship between the charter school and GDOE. And, you know, there's a lot of talk between key players to help one another. And a few weeks ago, you came on campus and said, how has GDOE helped you? And I said, I think the dialogue should be, how can we help each other? And one of the things that we've been able to do with GDOE is we talked about, well, how do you manage all those iPads? How do you monitor them so that we can do this? So we've had dialogues with GDOE in standard operating procedures, and we've had dialogue with them, and hey, why don't you try out Google Classroom? Come over and do this training with us. And so we've had GDOE come over to our school and do some training with our teachers. And so it's if you want to ask what would we look like 5 years from now, there will be charter school and GDOE exchanging ideas on how to become better for our public school students. And I'm glad we're doing this, and I just want to reiterate that it might seem like it's charter school versus GDOE, but I really think that there's a lot of collaboration there that is good, and that sometimes the media will bring up the versus part, but it's really not. I'm for procurement. I did the procurement classes. It holds me accountable to what the government and what the people of Guam has given us the opportunity to do. So I just wanted to close with that. Thanks.
Thank you for bringing some perspective. I wish we can end on that note. I have a couple perfunctory statements I have to issue for the listening audience. But before I do that, I want to thank Speaker Cruz for being present with us earlier. Senator Jolson Augustine has a conflict in his schedule, the good chairman on education. The record will evidence that both senators have been very strong proponents of education, both for the department and for the charter school entities. So with that said, special thanks also to the public auditor, Guam Education Board members, particularly the vice chair, superintendent for coming out. Amanda Blanche, you're doing an amazing job. Thank you to your council and your council members, Yuka and Mr. Tovez and others. The governor's office for being intimately involved with the process and the people for as long as I've worked with you, Mr. Leangro. So thank you to Governor Calvo for allowing you to represent him well. I want to thank the hardworking legislative staff and staff of the schools who are here. I see a lot of you, the volunteers from the councils. Thank you for coming, all of you. And then, of course, above all else, the leadership of the charter school entities. Thank you for coming and investing your time. I know you have a school to run. So let me close with this. This was a handwritten statement from somebody in the audience who couldn't stick around. And I'll just read 2 or 3 sentences, and it should leave us on a positive note. It says, to all the parties involved, and this is verbatim, we ought to all be as concerned for the education of our children of Guam, for they are our future leaders to make Guam what it is, a very strategic and important paradise island in the world. It is my utmost heartfelt belief that knowledge is powerful and that education is the key to success of our future as a whole. Si Dios Maasi, Walter Salas. So thank you, Mr. Salas. Your testimony has been read into the record. The subcommittee will continue to receive testimony for the next few days. Please address your testimony to the Subcommittee on Education or Charter Schools, Public Libraries, Technology, and submit your testimonies via email to willcastro671@gmail.com, or you may contact us at 969-1225. Other than that, Sidus Masi for your participation, everybody, and I look forward to meeting with all of you tentatively in the next 2 weeks. Thank you. God bless you all.